Hello everyone, back at it again, and I'm back at my fly tying bench, but we're not tying flies today. I want to take you through the process of how I set up a new spinning reel from start to finish. Now this process is going to be a little different for pretty much everyone. There's a lot of ways to accomplish the same thing. I'm just going to show you how I do it, and maybe this will be helpful if you're just starting out, or maybe you can learn something that you can incorporate later into your process. So a lot of the reels that I get now, they come from the factory almost dry. So they're saving money on oil and grease and lube, but I like my reels to be a little bit smoother. And this is a Daiwa Fuego, and it requires magnetic oil. Now I'm probably putting the magnetic oil a little bit above where it actually needs it, and this stuff is pretty hard to come by. I don't even really want to say where I got it from, but you need that magnetic oil for MagSealed Daiwa reels. For everything else, pretty much I just use regular Daiwa reel oil, which works great. This stuff is kind of a special deal for Daiwa MagSealed reels. And then for drag grease, what I use is something called Cal's drag grease. It's pretty good stuff. It's been around for a long time. So there it is, the little tub of Cal's drag grease, and you only need a little bit on the end of a Q-tip, and I just put it on that top drag to get going. If I really wanted to do this properly, I'd take apart that whole drag stack and do each and every one of them with a thin coat. Sometimes it helps to have rubber gloves. I also put some underneath the base of that spool because that's what's actually rotating on top of. Well, sometimes it's a ball bearing, sometimes it's a plastic bushing, sometimes it's just a little plastic washer or something like that. But that's the very first step I do, is to oil them and grease them up, and just start out smooth as I can. On a bait casting reel, I'll even lube up the bearings. Those sometimes come completely dry too. And just working in the oil feels pretty good to me. Now we can go on to the next step. Alright, next step is to get some backing. In this case I have Trilene Big Game, an 8-pound test. This line is a great value line. It's a little bit coily, a little bit hard to work with. I don't like it as a main line, but you get 1,700 yards. I think they sell it by the quarter pound. I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of line. In heavier pound tests, it's good for leader material, for stripers, or setting up bottom rigs in the salt water. But for this application, I'm just going to use it as backing. And there's a lot of reasons to use backing. First of all, you save a ton of money on line, even if you're going to put a different kind of mono as a top shot, or fluoro on top of it, or braid. You save a bunch of money, and you can save the good stuff for what's actually going to be in front of the fish. Second reason is, sometimes if you put braid directly onto the spool, if you really set the hook, the whole spool will spin. The whole spool of braid will spin, and that's really hard to fix. You basically have to take off all the line and start again once it starts spinning around the spool. So if you put a base of mono backing down first, you eliminate all that spinning on the spool. And a third reason is, sometimes when braid gets wet, say you're fishing in the rain, or you drop the reel in the water, or somehow just falls overboard for a second, or you're not paying attention, and the braid gets wet, it can actually rust the spool when it's in contact with the spool for a long time. It just doesn't dry out like mono does. Alright, so there's a bunch of reasons to use backing. The knot I use is similar to an arbor knot, but really it's just a slip knot that I jam with an overhand knot. Or you could do a two-turn clinch or something like that. It doesn't really matter, but it's just a slip knot, a regular standard slip knot that you might use on with a float or a bobber. And then I just jam that slip knot so that it doesn't slip anymore. And pull it tight against the spool. Usually I aim for about the middle of the spool. Trim the tag. And we're good to go. You'll also note that I put the reel on a rod here. It just makes everything easier if it's on a rod, and it doesn't have to be the rod that you're going to end up with. And so when you're spooling the line up, even with the backing, you want to make sure that the line lay is even. And so that's what I'm going to be looking for as I'm putting that backing onto the spool there. I want an even line lay. And if the line lay isn't even, what I'm going to do is add or remove washers that are underneath the spool. And you can tailor how you want the distribution of line on your spool. Usually for Daiwa reels I like it dead flat. For Shimano sometimes I like it either flat or with a little bit of an angle towards the spool lip. So a lot of it's personal preference, but I've got about, I don't know, half, 2/3 of the spool now filled up with that backing, and you can see the big game is pretty coily stuff. You can do stuff to try to straighten it out or eliminate some of that twist. Line conditioner helps. There's a product called Tangle Free. Some people like to pull the line through like a cloth or something like that. I just deal with the coils and the twist in it, and then try to pull out the twist the best I can before I go on to the next step. Alright, and the next step for this particular reel, it's a 1000 size Fuego, is to put 6-pound X9 on there. X9 comes in a few colors, but I could only find the 6-pound in this flame green color. It's more like a chartreuse than a flame green, but it's very bright, very visible. I like X9 for a braid for all kinds of applications, from 6-pound tests up to 50-pound tests. I use that for frogs. See how the line is just kind of puking off of that reel? That's what would happen if it was being used as a main line. And it would give me a headache fishing with this stuff. But for backing material, it's just about perfect. It's cheap, it's long lasting, it's got plenty of stretch, but I don't like it at all as a main line. And so the next step is, if I could get that big game to just cooperate with me for about 5 minutes, I'm loosening up the spool and using the drag to provide tension on the line. As long as I keep it tight, it won't try to jump off the spool. I pulled off a little bit too much line, and rather than deal with the reel, I'm just going to cut the little bit of excess there. There's kind of two ways that you can do this, or two ways that I use. There's probably 100 different ways to do this. I used to use a loop-to-loop connection. That worked pretty well. It's I would say not the neatest, but it works. I'm going to tie improved Albright here, and then I'm going to show you a different way to do it. But you could use an Alberto knot. You could use, really pretty much any kind of braid to leader knot that's out there to do this step. But I've tied Albrights forever, and they work pretty well for me. It's a nice slim knot. It'll kind of blend in with the bottom of the spool. It won't stick out a lot and snag the line as I'm casting. So I do about 10 wraps up, and then I do 2. I pass the line back the way it came in twice on the exit loop. So 2 wraps on the exit loop, and that helps, I don't know, keep the Albright from slipping out, that extra pass through on the exit loop. And then you wet it, cinch it down, and you're left with a pretty small connection knot. And for this part, I'm trying to show it on video. It's not quite focusing properly, but for this part, it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, this is a freshwater reel. I'm never going to get down to the backing in freshwater unless I change the line out. There's nothing in freshwater that's going to pull me into the backing, at least where I fish. So that was one method, the Albright Special or Improved Albright, whatever you want to call it. Here's another method. This is a nail knot tool that is popular with fly guys, and it's used for attaching a leader or tippet to fly line. Basically, you just overlap those 2 lines, and the lines go in the groove, and then you wrap one tag end over whichever line is in the groove, pass it under, wet it, and pull tight, and then you flip it over and do the other side. So you get both lines into that little groove there. And now I'm on to the braided side. The braid's a little bit slicker, often a little bit thinner than the mono backing. So maybe you could do, instead of 5 turns around, you could do 6 turns, which is I think what I did in that case. And then you wet it, pull it off. Got a little messy there when I yanked it off, but that's all right. And then you pull those 2 knots against each other, and the harder you pull, the more they pull against each other. You can see them kind of setting up. There it is. So the harder you pull, the more they pull against each other, because they're kind of wrapped underneath those coils and they're pulling against each other. So it ends up being a pretty good knot. Let's say it's not the best connection knot, but it's certainly, you know, an option. And especially for a backing knot, it works great. And you can join different sizes of materials, or maybe the Albright gives you trouble or something. You could use a nail knot and connect the backing to your braided line. And I'm pulling on it pretty hard there, and it's not coming undone. And I'm just going to add a little micro drop of super glue to it, just to make sure it never ever slips. You don't really need to do this part, but even if you kind of mess it up and don't get a perfect knot, or they don't seat properly, if you add a little bit of super glue to it, or I mean, you could even just cut the line and try again. You'll be set to go. It'd be helpful if I could get that knot into frame. There it is. Little tiny dab of super glue on there. And then I usually wipe my fingers over that knot with the super glue, just so I'm not pulling super glue through the guide or onto the line roller. I want to make sure that everything is all dry and not going to track super glue anywhere. So once again, I have to kind of fight with the big game a little bit. Very coily stuff. But once the braid is going over that backing line, it kind of locks it down, and the big game isn't going to give you any more trouble anymore. I'm also making sure that the line is going on the spool evenly with the braid as well, and it looks pretty good to me. Now for Daiwa reels, I tend to underfill them by just a couple percent, and that's because the line seems to want to jump off the spools a little bit more. And for something like a Shimano Stratic or an Ultegra, I tend to overfill those reels a little bit more, and that's because they seem to be able to handle it without the line jumping off the spool. And I do that to get just a little bit more distance. They already cast a little bit better. They have a long stroke spool on them, at least the new ones do. And when you overfill them a little bit, you get just a couple more yards of distance because the line kind of wants to come off the spool. That looks just about perfect to me. It's slightly underfilled. All right, the next part is adding some kind of leader material to the braid that we just put on. So I've got the braid in one hand, and I've decided I'm going to put 6-pound Maxima Ultra Green. It's a really great mono as a leader on top of that 6-pound braid. I think it'll make a nice match. You can use this combo for, any kind of panfish, maybe trout if they're not too line shy. And so what I'm going to do again is I'm going to make an improved Albright as my connection knot. If you want to tie an FG knot or a Alberto knot or back-to-back uni knot or whatever kind of knot you want, you can tie. I'm just showing you an improved Albright. So it's the same procedure as the backing knot. It's just another connection knot between mono and braid. And for this, I think I did 10 or 12 wraps up. And then on the exit loop, you want to go out the same way you came in, and then do that again. And that's the improved part of the Albright. And when I seize it up, or cinch it up, I'm going to go very slowly. I want those wraps not to bunch up or kind of jump over each other. I wet it a little bit. Make sure those wraps aren't jumping over each other. Nice and easy. And then pull it tight. And then once you pull it tight, don't keep yanking on it. That's it. It's seated. And if you just keep yanking on it, it's just going to weaken the knot. So then I trim the mono end. I trim the braid end. And I used about a 6-7 foot leader. You can adjust the length too, but generally I don't like that connection knot coming up over the line roller into the spool. I like it either on the outside of the guides or stopping before you get to the line roller of the reel. And like before, I'm going to add just a little tiny bit of super glue. And then I'm going to kind of roll it out with my fingers. Make sure it's dry before it goes through the guides, because I don't want to track super glue everywhere. Put the cap on, and then the last step is to put your favorite lure on. Once I get to the end of my leader. Alright, I've got a Z-Man Stingers here on a 1/13 ounce tungsten Cocho jig head. That's a mouthful, but I'll list it all in the video description. I had a little bit of old knot still left on the eye of that jig head, so I just trimmed that away. And now I'm going to try to pinch that 6-pound leader material, get it to go through that eye. And it's giving me a little bit of trouble because it's such a small eyelet there on that little tiny jig head. So one trick, I'm going to just keep at this for way too long, but one trick, if that's giving you trouble, is to go through with one single strand, like I'm doing right now, and then you come back with the single strand again. And it's still giving me trouble. But eventually I will get that little tiny 6-pound test through that little jig head eye. Alright. That was way harder than it should have been. But I've got a loop through the eye of that jig head now. It can slide back and forth, and for this I'm just going to tie a Palomar knot. So it's basically the loop and then overhand, and then you pass the bait through the big loop and then cinch it up tight. It's one of the simplest knots you can tie, and it's a pretty good knot. It's not the greatest knot, but it's a pretty good knot, and it's super easy to tie. And we're done. That's how to set up a new spinning reel from start to finish. We oiled it up, greased it up, added some backing, connection knots, braided main line. We added another connection knot to the leader material, and we tied on our favorite jig there. So thank you all for watching. I'll list everything in the video description, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!